Nguzo Saba, the 7 principles codified by Dr. Malana Karenga. These aren't just a list of key Swahili words that we should familiarize ourselves with during the last week of the year in our Kwanzaa celebrations. No, these principles are deeply rooted in our Kebalan tradition. Nguzo, pillar, or we might be more familiar calling it column, as in those columns we see in those Greco-Roman style temples in the past. But these columns don't have their origin in Greece or Rome. No, their origin is in Kemet, the original word being dejed. Dejed as in a column or a pillar or a structure in order to support the entrance to a temple. Dejed was tied back to one of our original deities, Osiris. He was considered the bringer of justice to the Kemetic people. He gave them their ability to civilize themselves. And so too do the Nguzo Saba. The 7 principles: Umoja, Kujichagulia, Ujima, Ujama, Nia, Kuumba, Imani. They roughly translate out to English as unity, self-determination, collective work and responsibility, cooperative economics, purpose, creativity, and faith.
Ujima, we fought for self, now let's fight for community. What is your sense of community? What images do you see? How are we portrayed? My sense of community is togetherness, through thick and thin, meaning the good and bad times. Community is a sense of loyalty. But listen, I'm gonna be all the way honest. You have to watch people's altruism versus egoism. I have your back if you have mine. As folks say, I'll ride for mines. What mines actually means is whatever you interpret it to be. Let's specify mines to mean our people. Let's change our mindset to a willingness to ride or die for our people. But don't get me wrong, riding out shouldn't be just one-sided. Ultimately, we need to view community as one hand washes another. We need to live by this and stop being selfish to one another. It gets us nowhere as a people, but separately fast. Although there may be different interpretations of Ujima, the definition we're using today is found in Nguzo Saba, defined by Malana Karenga. To build and maintain our community together and make our brothers and sisters' problems our problems and solve them together. Community starts with self. Once you, as in we, as in I, start the process of making a better you, me, us, then we can move on to Ujima, which represents collective work and responsibility. Let's be real. You have to be a responsible individual before you can take care or take on a responsibility for the community. We must have empathy for each other because we're going through the struggle together, but separately. No other race struggles separately, so why should our Kebalan people? And I know our Kebalan people can practice Ujima because we do it every day for the white man. Ujima is always represented in the workplace. We work individually in our positions to achieve a company's goals. Let's shift gears to healthcare, working on a unit with sick patients. When a patient is deteriorating in healthcare, they call that coding. Everyone pulls together, whether it's the NA, whether it's the tech, the nurse, the physicians, even the secretary. They make phone calls to whomever to get to the patient. We will all benefit if we transfer those same responses when our people experience a crisis. What does not following Ujima look like? It's when you have a car that broke down and you have a family member who supposedly does a great job with fixing cars. But because you know what they say, always try to keep a reliable mechanic around because unknown mechanics are unproven and tend to rip people off. So now you're out of a car. Although multiple people has complained about this person's business and ripping them off, but because it's your family, You use them anyway, having faith that this person won't do this to you and that this is not what the person does anymore. But yet and still, the crooked mechanic gets off once again, and no one says a thing because it is expected, and no one wants a responsibility of checking him on behalf of the community. We have to lead better lives of example for one another so that we can hold each other to higher standards. So remember earlier, I said one hand washes another. We are not practicing this for the main reason of allowing people to set up shop and take food out of our mouth and our children's mouth. You know what? Let me rephrase that. We readily give them our money. Everybody else spends money in their community. We must shop smarter. We have to, if we are to survive this game. Around the corner, it's 3 different blocks of stores that the community supports throughout dozens of years. I have yet to see any one of them support our community. In fact, after taking our money for years, they're the same ones calling the police on us for minor issues. Let's challenge these store owners to have a customer appreciation day. Have them donate to our schools in the hood. School supplies, team uniforms, sponsor a community rec center.
Walking from the bus stop in 6th grade is still something I remember. The bus would drop us off on the corner of Columbus Drive and 10th Street, and I would make the walk 2 blocks down to where my mother would be waiting. In that short walk, I got to see the landmarks of my community: the abandoned apartment building, the overgrown vacant lot littered with trash, old rusted out cars perpetually being fixed by old men with cigarettes hanging from their lips.
Right. My truck got 3 times better more than yours. Right there. That truck ain't been no further to the store and back here in the last 2 years. That don't make no, that's regular.
Hey,
that truck
I can get my truck. Hey, I gave them my truck. They was applauding.
Through all those sights, at the end would be Mom, asking me about my day. As a child, Ujima, in the form of my neighborhood and my family, enveloped me in a safety net. This is what I needed in order to grow into the adult I am today. My relationship with Ujima as an adult, however, is in transition. One of the reasons I am a part of Kajinga is to stop being a bystander while my community faces challenges. I have to become part of that safety net. Kujinga, Taifa, Leo.
And talking about rec centers, I can honestly say there are no recreational areas other than the parks for the children in my neighborhood. Having no community outlet for the children can have a negative impact on the community. Some of the negative impacts is not allowing the children to flourish as social beings. Children are isolated by video games and tablets, meaning they get no vigorous exercise from running by playing hide and go seek or riding their bikes or even jumping rope. In the past 10 years, I've noticed the nearest skating rink gone, the nearest bowling alley shut down, and the movie theaters demolished. As a community, we need to put our money together and invest in a building that can be recreational for our children, a safe place away from home utilized to stimulate their brain, for them to build as adults. Have them working together, building relationships and networking. We have to fight for ourselves. Go to a community board meetings and bringing up these issues. Have those businesses give the schools 10% of their income. Shit, Black people do it all the time for others, giving tithes to a church so the pastor could live tax and rent free. We have to demand those that are doing business in our communities to give back and contribute to its betterment. Speaking of business owners in our communities, let's talk about how the Chinese build their empire legally. They put their money together to open a business mostly in the food and nail industry. Once their businesses starts to thrive, they can now send for more family back home to come to the States and work. The new family that has come now takes over the standing store while the first family goes and gets a bigger business. And the chain keeps growing, and they keep the money made within our community because they invest in each other. The tactic guarantees that everyone in the family is good. Everyone pays their dues, then branches off. This is the epitome of compounding people versus living like crabs in a barrel. We as Alkebulan people have to act better. When we look out for one another, we all win. Although the nature of community has changed to include virtuality, we must live in a physical world. Alkebulan people is wanting to move to white neighborhoods. Once they've become successful, works against us. Do you think now, all of a sudden, you're good enough to live next to them? What made you think that they want to live next to you? Why do you feel accomplished if you live next to white people? Why don't you get the same level of pride living amongst your own? You're not proud of the hood? We can turn it around one residence at a time. Don't want to hear nothing about there's better school systems in the white people's neighborhoods because the parents make the school. Take responsibility. If you get involved with your child's school, you'll see a difference. If you volunteer your time to help in the school, especially living by the motto of it takes a village, why do people think once their kid is in school, they are no longer accountable for their children's actions? This is the main reason why teachers get fed up and give up on kids because there's no support at home.
Ujima is the principle of Nguzo Saba, which stresses collective work and collective responsibility. And it's impossible to speak about any kind of collective without introducing another big C word, community. When I hear that word, I often think of the words of our transitioned elder, Baba Dick Gregory, where he stresses that we do not live in a community. We live in a neighborhood, and more specifically, a hood, like the kind of hood that you use to cover your head and ignore everything that's happening in your surroundings. Hood 101 teaches that minding your own business is a survival mechanism, whereas in a community, you are required to participate. For the majority of us living in the diaspora, our dreams and aspirations are usually tied to getting out of the hood and moving into one of those white suburbs. This mindset is in stark contrast to community building. So what is a community? Well, it can be defined much like a neighborhood, a group of people living together having common characteristics. But more importantly, it is when these people come together to form common interests and take part in common ownership, not just of property, but of work and responsibility. Ujima and a sense of community are precursors to nation building. A good example comes to me in the form of the Black Panther Party of the 1960s. This group of young women and men decided to get together and arm themselves in order to defend themselves against the brutal practices of the Oakland Police Department. That effort alone would have gained the Black Panther Party notoriety in our history books, but they decided they were not going to stop there. Next on their agenda were community social programs, such as free breakfast for children and free clinics for the poor. When we begin relating to each other, not just as neighbors living next door, but as a community, then we begin to take responsibility for the most vulnerable among us. We must move away from the individualistic mindset if we're ever to regain our sense of community and our sense of nationhood. We must get back to our cultural norm of treating each other like extended family members. The work of family, sisterhood, and brotherhood, this is where community thrives. When we remove the concept of togetherness and common self-interest, what we're left with is individualism, much like what we see today. People mostly not concerned with what's occurring around them, unless it affects their lives personally. We have normalized the opposite of Ujima, the opposite of community, and the opposite of nation. And in the areas that we do not take responsibility for ourselves and for our community, we will be taken advantage of. We must become active participants with each other to determine our common self-interests. We can no longer leave it to others to sort out our common problems. My elder always reminds me that freedom is high-context responsibility. Let us share this responsibility using the principle of Ujima.
Haiti and Cuba's resolve in assuming responsibility as their brother and their sister's keepers are histories we should all know and take pride in. After Haiti took her independence from France, Spain, and the United Kingdom in what is the only successful slave rebellion ever in the world, Haiti, known as Al-Kebulan's eldest daughter, assumed responsibility for the liberation of all melanated people. Haiti entered a pact where she provided shelter, soldiers, weapons, materials, and an effective winning strategy to Simon Bolivar, who sought to expel the Spaniards out of South America. Haiti required no payment. She had only one condition for her willing assistance, that Simon Bolivar abolish slavery in the South American territories he successfully captured. As a result, Haiti was instrumental in the liberation of melanated people of modern-day Northwest Brazil, Venezuela, Bolivia, Colombia, Northern Peru, Panama, Ecuador, Guyana, Costa Rica, Nicaragua, and the Dominican Republic. In the spirit of making her brother and her sister's problems her problem, Haiti became the beacon of freedom in her community, this entire hemisphere. Cuba followed her older sister's example when she heard the distress call of her motherland. Under Fidel Castro, Cuba sent over 65,000 soldiers to 17 Al-Kebulan nations to fight alongside their brothers and sisters in their struggle against colonial rule and to assist in stabilizing governments by creating continental alliances. Just like Haiti, Cuba asked for no payment. In fact, this is a quote, Castro's decision derailed his secret negotiations with Washington to normalize relations. Had Castro been pursuing Cuba's narrow self-interest, he would not have sent troops to Angola. Castro sent Cuba's best planes, best pilots, anti-aircraft systems, and tanks to Angola to push the South Africans out of the country once and for all. We'll manage without underpants in Cuba if we have to, Raul Castro said. We'll send everything to Angola. Cuba's presence in Angola in particular is the reason South Africa's racist apartheid regime did not spread throughout the continent. Cuba has a long history of sending her professionals to better conditions in Al-Kebulan. The other year, during West Al-Kebulan's Ebola crisis, while America sent troops to secure its material interests in our homeland, Cuba sent doctors and nurses to preserve her primary interest, our lives. When faced with issues, my first inclination is to seek out examples of how we approached them in the past. Our problems are not new, and I know our foreparents did not turn a blind eye to them. On the subject of Ujima, collective work and responsibility, Haiti and Cuba stand out to me like the pyramids stand out when discussing the height of our creativity. Our foreparents in Haiti and Cuba made the lives of the people of Al-Kebulan descent, those that are spread out throughout the world, their responsibility. Haiti and Cuba displayed Ujima in the grandest of ways. They lived and died by it, for us. They are our giants on whose shoulders we stand as we navigate a mind-filled landscape towards liberation. Thankfully, they know the way.
In the next episode, we're going to take a dive into Black businesses. One question I have is, why aren't all Black business owners thriving? And I'm going to call them BBO. Not one of them should be struggling right now. I believe every last BBO should have the opportunity to hire a family member and or a friend, put someone on. Do you know that could be the answer to mass incarceration for our people? For instance, If I have a cousin doing a 10 to 15 year bid, when they come home, they need something to do. So I'm running a business is nothing to make a position for that person to keep them occupied from delinquency. This will keep our people home and further increase the wealth of the Alkebulan community. We need to gear up solely and purposefully to support one another.